You are going to live to approximately 78 years old. Maybe more, maybe less, but somewhere in that range, statistically, your body will give out, and you will have had 8 decades to experience the world, form relationships, watch things change, make mistakes, and figure out slowly, imperfectly, what actually matters. Your ancestor who lived 30,000 years ago did not have that luxury. The number you have probably heard is 35. Ancient humans lived to 35. And if that is what you know, then ancient life sounds like a brief, terrible sprint. Childhood, a few years of adulthood, then death. No old age, no grandparents, no accumulated wisdom passed across generations, just survival, reproduction, and an early grave. That number is wrong, not slightly wrong, deeply structurally wrong. And understanding why it is wrong and what actually killed ancient humans will change how you think about the human body, about modern medicine, and about what it actually means to be alive in the century you were born into. Let us start with the 35 myth, because it matters that you understand where it comes from and why it misleads. When archaeologists and anthropologists calculate life expectancy for ancient populations, they use a statistical measure called average life expectancy at birth. This number takes every person who was ever born into a population and averages out how long all of them lived. Every single person, including every infant who died in the first week of life, every child who did not survive their first winter, every person killed by infection before they reached adolescence. And in ancient populations, those numbers were catastrophic. Infant mortality rates in hunter-gatherer societies ranged from 20 to 50% in the first year of life alone. 1 in 5 to 1 in 2 babies did not survive their first 12 months. Child mortality across the first 5 years was similarly devastating. A significant fraction of every generation died before they were old enough to hunt, gather, or form memories that would last. When you average the lifespan of someone who died at 3 days old with someone who lived to 65, you get a number in the middle. And that number, 35, 40, whatever it calculates to, tells you almost nothing about what life looked like for the people who survived childhood. Here is what the evidence actually shows. If an ancient human survived childhood, survived the first 5 years, survived the infections and accidents and violence that killed so many so young, they had a genuinely reasonable chance of living into their 50s, 60s, and sometimes beyond. Studies of contemporary hunter-gatherer populations, which serve as our best model for ancient life, consistently show that adults who make it to 20 have modal lifespans, the most common age at death, in the range of 60 to 70 years. Ancient humans did not live fast and die young. Ancient children died at devastating rates. Ancient adults who survived childhood often lived to see their grandchildren. Those are two completely different statements, and confusing them has produced a century of misunderstanding about the ancient human body and what it was actually capable of. So if the 35 number is a myth, what actually killed people in the ancient world? The answer is 4 things, and each of them tells you something extraordinary about the gap between the world your body was built for and the world you are currently living in. The first was infection. Before antibiotics, before sterile surgery, before vaccines, infection was the single most lethal force in human existence. Not dramatic infection, not plague sweeping through cities, but ordinary everyday infection. A cut on your foot from a sharp rock, a tooth that rotted and spread to your jaw, a respiratory illness that settled in your lungs in winter and refused to leave. Childbirth, which in healthy young women carried significant risk of fatal infection in the days that followed. The human immune system is extraordinary. It evolved over millions of years to fight exactly these threats, but it has limits. And before the germ theory of disease, before any understanding of how infection actually worked, there was no way to help it when it fell behind. A modern infection that takes 3 days and a course of antibiotics would have killed someone in 10,000 BCE. Not always, not even usually, but often enough to matter, often enough to end lives that had decades left in them. The second was violence. Ancient humans lived in a world of genuine physical danger, not just from predators, though predator attacks were real and occasionally fatal, but from other humans. Studies of ancient skeletal remains consistently show high rates of trauma that are consistent with interpersonal violence, healed fractures, skull injuries, evidence of wounds that were survived and wounds that were not. Hunter-gatherer societies were not peaceful Edens, they were small groups of people competing for resources in environments where resources were sometimes genuinely scarce. Raids between groups occurred. Conflicts over territory, over mates, over food sources could turn lethal. Violence was not the dominant cause of death for most people most of the time, but it was a consistent presence, a background risk that modern humans in stable societies have largely eliminated. The third was starvation and nutritional deficiency. Food in the ancient world was abundant when it was abundant and catastrophically absent when it was not. Hunter-gatherer diets were actually remarkably diverse and nutritionally rich compared to early agricultural diets, but they were also seasonally variable in ways that could tip into genuine scarcity. A hard winter, a drought, a failed hunt, these could reduce food availability to the point where the most vulnerable members of a group, the very young, the very old, the sick, did not have enough to maintain their bodies. And nutritional deficiency, even without outright starvation, could weaken immune function, slow healing, and reduce the body's capacity to survive the infections and injuries that were always present. The ancient human body was not fragile, but it had no buffer, no stored reserves of medicine, no preserved food supply that could sustain a community through a prolonged shortage. When the food ran out, the consequences were immediate and biological. The fourth is the most surprising, and it is the one that most changes how you think about ancient life. Childbirth. Maternal mortality in ancient populations was significant. Giving birth without sterile conditions, without any intervention for complications, without any ability to perform surgery when the biology went wrong, it killed women at rates that modern humans in developed countries have almost entirely eliminated. Not most women, not even a majority, but enough that childbirth was genuinely one of the most dangerous experiences a woman in the ancient world could face. And this is connected to something we discussed in an earlier video, the obstetric dilemma. The combination of a narrow pelvis shaped by bipedalism and a large infant skull shaped by brain growth means that human childbirth is dramatically more dangerous than the birth process in any other primate. Ancient women navigated it without hospitals, without anesthesia, without any of the tools we now consider basic. They navigated it with community support, with accumulated herbal knowledge, with the presence of experienced women who had been through it themselves. And they navigated it successfully most of the time, but not always. And the times it went wrong, it went fatally wrong. Here is what all of this adds up to. Ancient humans were not biologically fragile. Their bodies were extraordinary, better suited for physical exertion than almost any modern human, more metabolically flexible, more physically capable across a broader range of conditions. The ancient human body was not weaker than yours. It was arguably stronger in most of the ways that matter to survival. What killed ancient humans was not biological weakness. It was the absence of knowledge that we have spent 10,000 years accumulating. The knowledge that invisible organisms cause infection, the knowledge that certain plants and compounds can fight those organisms, the knowledge that washing hands before delivering a baby saves lives, the knowledge that a tooth that hurts should be treated before the infection spreads, the knowledge that a fracture set correctly heals better than one left to fuse randomly. Every piece of medical knowledge you have ever benefited from, every vaccine, every antibiotic, every surgical intervention, every public health measure represents a discovery that someone in the ancient world did not have access to. And the gap between their world and yours is measured not in biological difference, but in accumulated understanding. Your body is not fundamentally different from the body of a human who lived 30,000 years ago. The genome has barely changed. The immune system is essentially identical. The capacity for physical endurance, for recovery from injury, for surviving infection, all of it is the same machinery running in slightly different software. What is different is everything around that body, the knowledge, the systems, the infrastructure that catches you when your biology starts to fail. Ancient humans did not die young because they were weaker than you. They died young, the ones who died young, because they were living the same biological life you were living in a world that had not yet figured out how to protect it. The body you were living in was built to last. It always was. What took time was building the world around it that would let it.